Today we are going to talk about James Bond and the Caribbean. For those of you who don't know me, I am John Moore, PhD. I have a PhD in history from Tulane University. I've done archival research around the world. I'm an instructor at Loyola University in New Orleans, occasionally at Tulane if they need me. And then I own and operate Broad Street Cider and Mead in New Orleans with Diana. Every time I like to give a little color on a little bit of background, so today I'll talk about my trajectory or kind of stumbling into a PhD program. So prior to going to Tulane, I worked an office job in commercial real estate research. It was one of those great jobs if they had just left me alone, right? So kind of 8 managers type of thing. And so I took night classes in a master's program at San Diego State University. We're originally from California and moved to New Orleans 15 years ago for my PhD program. Anyway, at this master's program, this is Master's of Liberal Arts, kind of a general studies idea, mostly doing it for fun. Had to come up with a thesis topic, so I wanted to do something about James Bond, something. I never actually finished that because I ended up getting into a history program at Tulane, doing a PhD and working through. But James Bond has always kind of been in the back of my head. And doing a presentation, this is the first time I've actually ever been able to do this. I've tried to structure classes before. It's very tricky with rights, especially. So anyone involved in like copyright and free use, all of that. So if you're looking for, he's going to have a lot of clips, I'm not, because that's extremely expensive. Even if you're running a class, for example, Tulane might be able to afford it. Sometimes they have money, sometimes they dump a lot of money in the football program, though. So, hey, number 11 going against Ole Miss, so we'll see. Libraries, like, they have to buy the DVD, it's $15-20. No, you have to buy a certain type that has the licenses, and it could be $300 to $3,000 for that same thing in order to show clips that are, it's pretty much 8 seconds or less is the rule of thumb. So that's why when you watch things on TV, when they're quoting things or having little clips, like it's that 8 seconds, I think is that certain number. It's easier in this presentation just to kind of show you screen shots, and so I'll walk through. But anyway, a little bit of color on my background and why I'm interested in James Bond. As always, I'll do about, this time it's only 80 years instead of 500 or 1,000, in about 7 or 8 minutes, give you some background and history on the films themselves, talk about Ian Fleming and his role in Jamaica, and then walk through, take a brief break as I always like to do, and do kind of small chatting, and then move on and I have 4 certain films I want to walk through. So James Bond films have been influencing and been influenced by popular culture since the early 1960s. With the release of Dr. No in 1962, and I'll talk more about that, the James Bond series began its ongoing run that has now lasted for well over half a century. Bond, some scholars say, is a moving sign of the times, so especially in the representation of gender norms. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but not too heavily. Whereas other scholars view the character in the series as somewhat static, essentially trapped in the 1970s in a formula that's trying to shove together in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. I tend to think of it, I agree with some scholars that call Bond a dormant signifier. It's a nice term. That it's a familiar and recognizable institution that is inactive for years at a time, right? We've gone through kind of a drought at this point because MGM, issues with MGM, but it's being reactivated with the release of new film. It's not one of those series, if you think of, say, Harry Potter movies, the actors themselves are growing, so there's a certain amount of like, get it all done. Bond series can kind of come off for a couple of years. Generally speaking, it was every 3 years or so for a good amount of time until you're getting into the 1980s, as we can see. And then it's kind of spread. There was a glut in, or a batch of them in the late 90s, and then now we're getting into kind of slower, it's roughly every 4 or 5 years. I wanted to talk about Ian Fleming and give you a little bit of information on his background. So Ian Lancaster Fleming, 1908 to 1964. He came from a wealthy family connected to a merchant bank, and his father was even a member of parliament from 1910 until his death on the Western Front in 1917. Educated at Eton, Sandhurst, so these kind of elite British institutions, and briefly the universities of Munich and Geneva, which Fleming moved through several jobs before he started writing. So if you are familiar with the kind of Bond canon, there's kind of wrinkles about Geneva and Bond's backgrounds that kind of is folded in from Ian's education there. While working for Britain's National Intelligence Division, which this is the Admiralty in the picture, during the Second World War, Fleming was involved in planning Operation GoldenEye. And we'll hear about GoldenEye 2 other times, and in the which is the planning and oversight of 2 intelligence units. He drew from his wartime service and his career as a journalist for much of the background, detail, and depth of his James Bond novels. He wrote the first Casino Royale in 1952 when he was 44 years old. It was a success, and 3 print runs were commissioned very quickly to meet demands. 11 Bond novels and 2 collections of short stories followed between 1953 and 1966. So 2 of them were published posthumously after he died. The Bond code number 007, being a commander in the Royal Navy, and Bond stories all were kind of brought back from Ian's wartime experience. The stories remain some of the best-selling of all time, having sold over 100 million copies worldwide. Fleming, fun fact, also wrote the children's story Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in 1964. Didn't know that. And 2 works of nonfiction. So he's married to Anne Charteris. She had divorced her husband, a viscount, of course, because of her affair, of course, with the author. Fleming and her had a son, Casper, who tragically died at 23, and it was one of those, was it an overdose or was it a suicide? Because he oddly enough died on his father's birthday, so it was after his father died, but kind of tragically. Ian himself was a heavy smoker and drinker for most of his life, as we can see, and he died from complications of heart disease in 1964 at the age of 56. And again, 2 of his novels were published after his death. Other writers, of course, have since produced Bond novels, and Fleming's creation has appeared in film 27 different times, portrayed by 6 actors in the official film series, and it's a deep wrinkle. But now moving to Jamaica and Fleming's role there. So GoldenEye Estate is an actual estate. It still exists. So in 1939, during the war, Fleming went to British Naval Intelligence. In 1942, he was working on a naval operation investigating Nazi U-boats in the Caribbean and fell in love with the area. Operation GoldenEye was actually something in Spain to make sure Franco didn't enter the war on the side of the Nazis, but GoldenEye was certainly a cool name that he picked up. And so he bought 15 acres of tropical overbush, which was, if anyone came to my Aruba talk, you know how I feel about donkeys, formerly a donkey racetrack, which is kind of a fun fact. Racetracks, especially in America and across the Americas, is kind of a fun, is this a cemetery and old racetrack? So if next time you look on a topographical map, you can actually see, so New Orleans, we have 2 of them are cemeteries and one of them is a public park that were old racetracks. So it's kind of a fascinating idea of what do you do with decommissioned racetracks? Either build fancy estates or cemeteries, so it's kind of a common thing. So by 1952, Fleming began work on the first book, Casino Royale again. He wrote every story featuring 007 at his GoldenEye estate in Jamaica on the Oceania Bay, excuse me. It is now an exclusive resort. It's so exclusive, it's one of those things I couldn't actually figure out the pricing because it kind of operates as a private club, but it might be invite only. I'm not exactly sure. The internet is a little bit of a black hole when it comes to it. But, for example, Sting actually wrote the hit "Every Breath You Take" while staying at the resort, and Bono, even wrote the theme song to the GoldenEye film while staying here. Tina Turner ended up singing it, but Bono and Edge wrote it. The artists, writers, and musicians from around the world visited Fleming while he owned the estate, and that kept going because it's Island Records founder, which is kind of very big into reggae, so it's Chris Blackwell acquired the property during the 1970s. Between Blackwell and Fleming, the estate was actually briefly owned by Bob Marley before he passed away. Kind of fun fact. So as always, I'm asking you to turn to your neighbors, turn around, kind of see who's around you. What are some of the things we know about James Bond? Is there anything, I forgot to add this, anything I've said so far that you want some clarification for? But this is kind of a fun topic, right? What are some of the things you know about James Bond? I'm gonna ask later on, who are your favorite Bond or Bonds? So don't go into that yet. Talk anything else about, so what are some of the things you know about James Bond? Take 90 seconds or so, and we'll come back to some of the things you know about Bond, or think about Bond, or interested in Bonds. Martinis, right? Shaken, not stirred, which is wild. So martinis was the comment. Shaken, not stirred, of course, was the absolute incorrect way to make that drink. But we all can't get everything right, correct? Over here, you got something?
No, it was something I didn't know, which was David Niven had played Bond.
David Niven, yeah, it was a kind of made for TV.
Repeat the question.
Thank you very much. So something we didn't know, David Niven had played Bond, and it was kind of a not very good made for TV movie. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's kind of not. It's in the canon technically, but scholars generally kind of skip over it. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so the comment, very dry humor, especially certain characters are known much for their kind of humor. There is the kind of balance of humor and sexuality on one side and violence on the other, and sometimes we kind of wave back and forth, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we wander through. Anyone else? I heard womanizer.
That was me.
Womanizer. Yes. Yeah, the incredible, so the comment was incredible music. So Paul McCartney, Let It Not Die, Tina Turner, and again, I would love, but just kind of cycling through those songs, and that's one of the iconic moments of the film, kind of sets up, and I'll talk about that when we get into Dr. No in a second. Yes, please.
And many films have copied the intro.
Yes.
You know, with the background, the silhouette.
The many films, the comment was many films have copied this formula. So having this very, so there'll be a cold open where there's a scene that doesn't really link until pretty much the back third of the movie. Maybe you'll be like, why was he chasing that guy? Who cares? And then essentially 2 minutes and 30 seconds to 3 minutes, the song length of a very graphic kind of various lightings, might be silhouettes, and that's been copied over and over again. It's very stylistic of the, I'll go out front here and then end with you in the back.
The tux or dark suit?
So the tux and the dark suit, so the tux and the dark suit was the comment. Does anyone know the weird fact about Bond actors in a tuxedo? This is a fun one. So here's Rosin here. Here we are in a full-on tuxedo. So the Bond actors, and partially because Connery, I believe, he has this gap between Only Live Twice and Diamonds Are Forever. Lazenby got shoved in there. So in this kind of dead zone, I believe it was Connery essentially had a knockoff Bond movie. He wasn't super friendly with the Bercolis, the producers, and he wore a tuxedo. And so every subsequent actor, there's a rider in their contracts that they are not allowed to wear a full tuxedo. However, there's always a however, right? So Pierce Brosnan here, again, kind of had an okay working relationship with the Bercolis, and then it kind of fell off. and World Is Not Enough. So first 3 movies did okay, and then afterwards, he played a movie that was a remake of the Thomas Crown Affair. So I think it was a 1950s movie originally. It's kind of a rich guy who liked to steal art and crash boats. It's very fun. So he kind of found the line and got up right to it as far as this no tuxedo rule. And he wore a tuxedo in that movie, but he didn't button the tie. So it's kind of hanging. There's a scene of him sitting there very smug. And it actually works for the character because he even somehow pulls up even more smug, which is very hard for Pierce Brosnan to do. But yeah, tuxedo, that's the fun fact. I'm super helpful. Glad to bring that in. And then last question back here, please. Or comment. Yes, yeah, thank you so much. Gadgets, cars, and Q was the comment. I actually don't bring that up too much. It didn't fit that well into this narrative arc. But yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that in. And that's one thing, I'll say kind of color commentary on the, Amazon now owns MGM, which owns the rights for Bonds, or kind of waiting for Bezos to pick Bond, is how the world is. But one of the fan base is kind of broken up as far as like, no, it should just be movies. There was this failed TV adaptations in the 60s, so we can never do that again. There's a weird cartoon called James Bond Jr. in the 90s, if anyone, my fellow millennials maybe. So I'm of the, I think there's enough, I would totally be okay with the 1940s, 1950s, like backstory on M, or kind of like development of Q or something. Like that'd be cool, like little 8-part series, don't squeeze it too much. But that would be a real fun thing, I think, for Amazon to do. And we'll see, but that's kind of the way of the world. Disney things have gone this way. Star Trek is getting kind of squeezed, but some great things have come out of that, like Mandalorian, right?
Star Wars. Star Wars.
Excuse me, Star Wars. Thank you so much. All right. So thank you all. I appreciate that. So now I'm going to go through 2 films, and then as promised, I'll ask everyone who their favorite Bond is, and then kind of have a fun sleight of hand when I do talk about that. So Dr. No, first film, sets the stage for the series. So it was a 1958 novel, 1961 film. It's the only film that Fleming got to see the production and actually see the film before his death. So it sets the tone for the entire film series, amongst other things. So briefly, the story, Bond is sent to Jamaica to investigate the disappearance of a fellow British agent. This will come up again, don't worry. The trail leads him to an underground base of Dr. No, who's plotting to disrupt an early American space launch from Cape Canaveral with a radio beam weapon. It sets the stage for all the subsequent films. Begins with an introduction to the character through the view of a gun barrel. So this is actually riveted, a rifle is what it's called, rifling those lines. Makes bullets travel in a kind of travel straight. It was accidentally. I'm pretty sure historically, so it's during the U.S. Civil War, someone came up with that as far as an easy way to clean out kind of remnants of firing guns, and they figured out that it actually makes bullets kind of travel in a straight line. But barrel of a gun, kind of the red is, Bond kind of walks this way, shoots at the camera, and then the red kind of goes down. Elaborate visual style is one of the hallmarks of the film series. The iconic theme music, here it's the original score by Monty Norman, and then a lot of subsequent music references that. So in the story, Jamaica, in Dr. No, Crab Key was not a place, but now it is a place, so we'll talk about that. So it's fictional initially, is presumably an island off the coast of Jamaica, and serves as the stronghold of the mysterious villainous Dr. Julius No. So boatsman Coral helps Bond row across to Crab Key from the nearby island of Jamaica. He meets shell diver Honey Ryder, and I'll talk more about her in a minute. Battles a flamethrower-equipped dragon tank, of course, and after a few wandering, just literally wandering, ends up in the hidden base of Dr. No. An explosion or two later, the world is saved. Dr. No, so it was kind of a montage as far as, so at this point, Connery's Bond is kind of wandering around, and then they cut to waterfalls, and you're like, oh, that's great, it's behind the waterfalls, why not? So these are Dunn's Rivers Falls. So Dr. No's secret lair was a composite of several scenic locations like this. Laughing Waters, of course, sets the stage for arguably the most famous scene in Bond history, when Honey Ryder, Ursula Andress, emerges from the ocean. And then today, this is actually also known as Crab Key Beach. So Crab Key didn't really exist, it's not a separate island, but then where this beach was filmed and Ursula Andress comes out is now known as Crab Key Beach. Moving on, so Roger Moore, it so happens that all of these films I've picked, first off, I like them. And second off, they're all the initial outings of the actors themselves. So Connery's first, of course, and then this was Roger Moore's first, Live and Let Die, 1973. And so it was an earlier novel, 1954. So it's set in Jamaica and New Orleans, partially in Harlem, but that's kind of quick. The storyline involves a drug lord in Harlem known as Mr. Big, who plans to distribute 2 tons of heroin for free, so it's like Uber 10 years ago, to put rival drug lords out of business and then become a monopoly supplier. Mr. Big is revealed to be the alter ego of Dr. Kananga, a corrupt Caribbean dictator who rules San Monique, a fictional island, again, where opium poppies are secretly farmed. Bond has investigated the deaths of 3 British agents, I promised you it'd come up again, leading him to Kananga, where he's soon trapped in the world of gangsters and voodoo, and he fights to put a stop to Kananga's scheme. I have lots of fun stories here. So, Live and Let Die, the Cupo's son, so she is a fancy hotel in Ocho Rios, which served as a hotel and nightclub in the film, again in Jamaica. Also Jamaica, emphatically not Louisiana. Anyone else from Louisiana? Oh yeah, cool, awesome. So those of us who live or are familiar with there, crocodiles do not live in Louisiana. Florida has both crocodiles and alligators. And if you want a fun video find, go crocodile versus alligator. And you're like, look at them, you're like, oh, the alligators look so nice. Crocodile ones are very terrifying, hissing. Alligators are chill. But in Jamaica, Live and Let Die, so how Bond films were created, especially in the 70s and 80s, and a little bit in the 60s, there would be a rough sketch of the plot, and then they would go out and search for scene locations. So while searching for scene locations, the crocodile farm in Falmouth, Jamaica, which is now known as the Jamaica Swamp Safari Village. It still exists. Guests can visit this wildlife preserve and see more than 150 American crocodiles. The first owner of this was a gentleman named Ross Kananga. And let's tell you a little bit about this. So the scouts first saw this "trespassers will be eaten" sign. And of course, they were intrigued. After meeting with Kananga, they were convinced the swamp safari should be used as part of the film. If this name, Kananga, sounds familiar, like, John, you told me that wasn't that? Yes. The charismatic Kananga inspired screenplay writer at the time to name the film's main Bond villain, Dr. Kananga. So that's that thread. Kananga himself suggested this stunt of Bond, of course played by Roger Moore here, jumping on crocodiles, and was enlisted by the producers to perform it. So he's a 30-year-old guy, lives in Jamaica, he's from Ohio, kind of an interesting background. His first name was Ross Hillman. He switched his name to Kananga because he found out about his Seminole heritage and wanted to change his name. Unfortunately, he died 2 years later spearfishing in Florida. It was he might have been attacked, he might have had a heart attack, it was but 2 years after this, he tragically dies. Either way, Kananga was enlisted by the producers to perform this trick. So it's, I found a still of it. So if you remember from the film, essentially Roger Moore's character is brought out to an island by the sub-villain, the henchman, and then kind of like, oh, the crocodiles are going to eat you, and then he runs off. And so Kananga actually did this. So he didn't do this just once or twice. Let me make sure, it's a lot. 5 takes, took 5 takes. He ran across crocodiles in his own lagoon, including one in which the last crocodile, imagine that, get all the way, the last crocodile snapped at Kananga's heel, tearing his trousers and causing him several injuries, one of which required 193 stitches. Kananga was eventually paid $60,000 for his contribution. All of these things. It kind of lives in infamy now because of this kind of stuntman. And again, he ended up leaving Jamaica quickly thereafter. He had family in Florida, and then tragically died while spearfishing. But yeah, that whole thread, I was like, I can just do 45 minutes on this guy. So in the narrative arc of the film, the kind of the final last scene in Live and Let Die is actually filmed in Green Grotto Caves in Jamaica. So in the 80s and 90s, this is kind of like a sad discoteca. But at this point, you could just visit it. So it's in the north of Jamaica's coast, where Rogers Moores took out the evil Dr. Kananga. As promised, I want to take another, we're right on time, another 90 seconds or so. And so this is where, with your neighbors, who are your favorite Bonds? So 1 or 2, and I have a little bit of a parlor trick or an educated guess, and I'll walk you through that. And if you're not sure at all, you're like, I'm not exactly sure, just close your eyes and think, James Bond, who do you see? That's probably your favorite one, or at least the one you think of. So take, 60 to 90 seconds amongst yourselves, and we'll come back together. Nothing, don't worry about that. So, who is the James Bond actor when you were age 14? So I've kind of put this up for you again for the math. So kind of where were you in this timeline for age 14? So my guess for your favorite Bond, or who close your eyes and think of Bond. So are that actor plus Connor, because you kind of have to. So for me, I'm a deeply 80s baby. So right there, Tomorrow Never Dies was my first Bond movie I saw. Anyone else? Did I guess, or was that roughly right? As far as like when you were 14?
We're older than that.
We're older. I know Connery for sure. And it is what? Yes, please. One second. Sorry about that. What? Daniel Craig all the way. Yes. Yeah. The other kind of is Daniel Craig. But let me walk you through why I think this might be the case, and you might change your mind. So, imagine you were 14 years old and you want to go to the movies for the first time by yourself. You have that cool friend that's been able to go to the movies by themselves for 12 years old, and since 12. You've been jealous of them, your mom doesn't let you go out, it's dangerous at night, you can't do all these things. But when you're 14, so that's me at this point, Tomorrow Never Dies. When you're 14, I was 13, but you say, but come on, I'm just gonna go see a James Bond movie. It only has a little bit of sex and a little bit of violence. And even then, your parent, there's a certain amount acceptable. A lot of the earlier films, especially in the 70s, 80s, there's a violent streak, but are really just rated PG. You might get a PG-13, you're generally not going to get an R, right? There's a familiarity, when I was talking about dormant signifier earlier, so your parents even then might be like, hi, I'm familiar with James Bond, I don't know this Marvel character, or this Pokemon, or whatever, there's a certain amount of like, generations kind of lose their own way. But James Bond, when you're 14, it might have actually been, it's a lot of people's first movie out that they can go see by themselves or with their friends. So there's a certain nostalgia and like remembering that fact. It wasn't the exact one, but it was definitely like the first 5 movies I was able to see by myself. And then it was Tomorrow Never Dies. I keenly remember the theater, I remember all the things about it. So that's kind of my Slight parlor trick. And then I've done this many times before, and it never works out. I really wanted to one of these times, but I'll keep trying. So, moving forward, speaking of Brosnan, so GoldenEye, so originally in operation, becomes the estate in Jamaica, and then the Bond producers essentially say, "This is a great name. Let's just use it." So the Archiabio Observatory, so the main instrument, and then I wanted people like, oh, we're going to Puerto Rico. So San Juan is here, and it's way on the other side of the island. So it's not reachable for us. And there's not much to see. So this is its current state. So 2020 picture of it. The observatory's main instrument was the telescope, the giant reflector dish. So in the film, it's like a fake lake that Bond flies over, and then the missile hits him, and then the Insignia on the top comes and strangles him. It's great. It's totally realistic. Several radar transmitters were mounted 150 yards above the dish. It was completed in 1963 and was the world's largest single aperture telescope for 53 years. It's still owned by the U.S. National Science Foundation. In 2020, however, two of the receiver's support cables, so these guys, fell and then kind of made the entire thing collapse. And then eventually, towards the end of the year, by 2 years later, the National Science Foundation announced the telescope would not be rebuilt, it wasn't really used anymore, and an educational facility would be established on the site. In the film, so this is kind of like the screenshot of Bond dangling, so it's Sean Bean is the bad guy in this one. It's actually, it holds up. I really like this. But again, it's deeply 80s baby, so this is my Bond. And then the green screen of this. So it's vaguely somewhere in Cuba in the film. The location is in Puerto Rico, however. And this stands in for a secret facility where Brosnan's Bond fights with the rogue British agent over the huge satellite bowl. The observatory also played a starring role in Jodie Foster movie Contact, if you remember this, and currently has a visitor center and is open to the public. Another thing, so more current, we talked, Daniel Craig is our current Bond, of course, or our current Bond, excuse me. Casino Royale is, I have 3 different spaces for that. The construction site is not actually Madagascar, so the cold open is Bond chasing Bombmaker from a snake mongoose fight to the Nambutu embassy. It is not Madagascar vaguely, it's actually in Nassau, Bahamas. The construction site was an abandoned hotel site at Coral Harbor on New Providence Island that was under construction decades ago. The Bond producers kind of go back to the well a lot, so this has actually been in 3 different films. This one is much more prominent. So in 1977's The Spy Who Loved Me, it was a camera platform for other pieces, and then briefly as hotel rooms when it was being built out in the 1960s, that kind of fell apart, but in Thunderball 1965, it had a wall. And it is now part of a kind of a police and military base where they do kind of like commando type stuff, like breaches and things of that nature. I found a blog post where someone wanted to look at every Bond site ever, and they talked about bribing a guard to get inside. It's, some people get pretty deep in these things. In the film, the one and only Ocean Club plays a role. Bond stays in the Bahamas, travels there to track down a business associate of a terrorist financer, Lashif, which is Mads Mikkelsen, which great role. He gets an ocean view villa, so it's Villa 1085 if you want to stay Bond style. You'll find the resort, which opened as a hotel in 1962 on the eastern end of the island, across from Nassau Harbor. In this, earlier scenes in the film, I think it was Felix Leiter, or someone else tells Daniel Craig's Bond, oh, it's just up the beach, the henchman's house, and that it isn't actually. The Minerville and Seafoot property is the Albany Golf and Beach Club, a private luxury resort way across the island, down the southwest tip, part owned by the probably unvillainous golfer Tiger Woods at one point. And this is where Bond emerges from the sea. Gotta take a drink of water for this one. So if anyone remembers, here's the still, boom, Daniel Craig. So the beach emerging scene, it's kind of this funny series of events. So while filming, Craig, there's actually a sandbar in the back, and out in the sea. So he essentially goes from like shoulder high water to chest high water by like one stand. So he emerges and then he's walking towards the viewer. The scene itself is 13 seconds long of this. 13 seconds is an eternity in film times. So he makes eye contact with the henchman's beautiful wife Solange, and then camera seems to linger forever on Craig's saltwater drenched body. Craig himself, now we're very fond of him. He's doing great in these detective series roles. Knives Out, I think that's a great pivot for him. Like, and it's kind of a fun, like, Southern voices and British voices are almost the same. And so the 37-year-old actor at that point was extremely controversial. So he's blonde, kind of working class, very muscular. So this kind of muscular Bond versus, so he was snarkily said, he's not James Bond, he's James Bourne. So his Bourne Identity was filmed at the same kind of mid-aughts. Taking on the role vacated by the posh, dark, and handsome Pierce Brosnan. Talked about his kind of like smug tuxedo look. Many doubted Craig was up to the task, so the swimming scene provided a very useful PR tool for establishing his leading man credentials. It was used in the trailer, promotional images, and confirmed Craig's sex appeal. It also, however, we talked about Ursula Anders, was a callback to another famous franchise moment, the original Bond girl Ursula Anders's bikini-clad emergence. I bring in Halle Berry's Die Another Day in 2002. That was just so like, that movie was bad. I mean, it's one of the few ones where I'm like, they just drew from the well too much. Like they brought back too many of the gadgets, too many of the old things. It was the 40-year anniversary, so they very much leaned into it. And again, at that point, Brosnan and the Broccoli's didn't really have a great working relationship, so there's theories that the film was purposely bad because they hated each other at that moment. So, but in either case, I added it in there because my lovely wife Diana was like, "What, Halle Berry too?" So this kind of linking a very masculine. I briefly talked about kind of role of gender, but thinking about the terms masculinity and manliness are very useful. So masculinity would be this kind of buff, rough and tumble, working out, whereas manliness, thinking more like Roger Moore's and Pierce Brosnan Bonds, kind of the suave, sophisticated, like understands wine, can like that's a very different view of how male kind of genders performs, and these two terms are nice ways to distinguish, right? So masculinity, kind of strength, 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger type films. Manliness is more suave, debonair. These are both ways of portraying male characters, and I think that's a nice way to think about Bond characters as well. As always, I have so no CIA this time. I have my some of my citations, some academic stuff, some news articles. Like I said, I have an unfinished master's thesis that I got to kind of steal from my own work from 20 years ago at this point, which is very nice. And then I would also like to thank you so much. For those of you who do not know, this is only my second day ever working, so this was my fourth talk ever. I am very new to the speaking game, so if it shows, I have an excuse. If it doesn't, I'm brilliant. Yeah. So I want to thank you. My wife Diana has been very helpful. Oceania for taking a risk and a bet on me. The entertainment team, Dottie, Jamie, and everyone here for helping me out. And Gilbert has been fantastic. Thank you for that. And I also like to close with philosopher Simone Weil, who is writing in 1942, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity, and you have all given me that." So I appreciate it very much, and I hope you learned something about the environment. Thank you.